Greetings from down under New Zealand, where it's sunny almost all the time, and on the economic front it's pretty sunny as well. But first let's get the one economic challenge out of the way, and that's really the dairy sector. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is low prices, and that has been putting cash flow pressure on farmers, and that has been impacting on spending in those regions that are quite dependent on dairy. But even for the dairy sector, we are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We have started to see dairy prices pick up, and we're very positive that the ultimate payout for the season is going to be much stronger and much more comfortable for farmers. So even then the pressure is going to be coming off that sector. When we're looking at the bigger economy, what we're seeing is actually the encouraging thing is it's outside of places like Auckland where we're seeing a lot of the strong growth. So the Bay of Plenty is actually the top region in the ASB regional scoreboard. We're also seeing Otago and Canterbury look pretty good. When we're looking at our industries, on the export side, the thing that really stands out at the moment is the tourism sector. We're seeing very, very strong growth in the number of people coming, particularly from China. So keep on encouraging people to come down and search for Hobbiton in the depths of the Waikato. All that money is really filtering up and down the country as we're seeing these gains come through. The kiwi fruit sector recovering very, very well. We're seeing our other fruit exports do well. The wine industry having a fantastic season. So we've got quite a broad export performance, and that's contributing to a good economic performance for New Zealand. When we're looking at some of the domestic drivers, one of the key ones is population growth. The reality is that what we're seeing is some very strong inbound migration flows. People simply want to live in New Zealand at the moment, so we're seeing a lot fewer New Zealanders actually leave New Zealand, and a lot more New Zealanders come back, particularly from Australia. And that's really contributing to that strong population growth. Along with that comes a strong housing market and very strong construction activity. So to meet all these needs for these people, we're seeing a lot of home building happening, a lot of commercial construction activity happening. And you may, over my shoulder, be able to spot one of the many, many cranes that's dotting the Auckland landscape. And that's a sight that's common up and down the country. So that strong growth in people, the construction sector, really contributing to a very strong story here in New Zealand. What we're expecting to see is that economic growth will pick up from a little bit below 3% to around 3.5%, and it's a pretty decent outlook, even though part of that story is about the number of people. Now, I can't really talk about New Zealand without talking about the housing market, which is everybody's favourite subject up and down the country. What we have seen is quite a strong boom, particularly in Auckland over the last few years, but prices have been starting to rise quite strongly in other parts of the country where population growth has been quite strong. So that's places like Hamilton, Tauranga and Queenstown, for example. Now, in response to those high house prices, just bear in mind that the Reserve Bank has been putting lending restrictions into place. So effectively, if you're wanting to buy an investment property in New Zealand at the moment, you're going to need to come up with a 40% deposit or 40% equity. And even if you're thinking of coming back to New Zealand to live, you'll need to have at least a 20% deposit for the home that you are going to live in most cases. What we're seeing on that property front is, though, on the commercial side, those restrictions aren't applying. You've actually got stronger gross rental yields on that, so that is another option as well if you're looking at the property market. Now, when it comes to interest rates, one thing about these loan restrictions is it is giving the Reserve Bank a little bit more comfort that it can really look hard at that low inflation environment at the moment and address that by cutting interest rates further. So it's quite likely we'll see the official cash rate continue to fall a little bit later on this year, possibly again next year. So New Zealand does have that low interest rate environment, which is common around the rest of the world. Where New Zealand stands out a little bit, I think, is the fact that our interest rates are still higher than what you can get around the rest of the world. So that does mean New Zealand stands out from a global investor point of view. And it does mean that people do have that option to invest at something above a zero yield, which is all too common. But also from a New Zealand context, lending rates are actually, whilst higher than other countries, still very low by New Zealand standards. So still quite appealing as well from that investment front. Now, when we turn and have a look at the New Zealand dollar, obviously one of the key things that does influence it is those interest rate differentials, and we do have that degree of interest coming from overseas, which is propping up the currency. That strong growth story also does mean people are encouraged to come and invest in New Zealand with the prospect that the economy is going to be generating some pretty decent returns. And don't overlook that political stability. When you look around the world at the moment at what is happening, what we're seeing in the UK with the Brexit vote has raised uncertainty there. We've got the US election coming up. Even next door to New Zealand and Australia, a lot more political uncertainty these days than what there used to be, given how quickly they're turning over their Prime Ministers. So we're likely to find that for the New Zealand dollar against the US dollar and the Chinese yuan, that we are holding pretty firm around the sorts of recent levels that we're at. It's just simply a reflection of New Zealand looking good compared to the rest of the world. So just to sum up, how's New Zealand sitting? Look, growth here is pretty respectable. It's likely to pick up a bit further. There are some pretty broad drivers for the New Zealand economy. It's also meaning that there's a lot of employment opportunities. There are emerging skill shortages as well, which is something to keep an eye on in your particular profession. And interest rates likely to remain pretty low, but not quite as low as what we see in other countries. So all things considering, an outlook that's pretty reasonable. Thank you very much for listening, and if there's any more information that you want, contact Care or jump on the ASB website. Enjoy the rest of your function.